Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Dean Sluyter, who's here to share with us his two new books, The Dharma Bum's Guide to Western Literature, Finding Nirvana in the Classics, followed by Cinema Nirvana, Enlightenment Lessons from the Movies. So let's welcome to the show, Dean Sluyter.
Thanks so much, Marianne. Really great to be here.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. And even before we dive into it, because there's so much great information in your book, why don't we start with, some of the basics? Maybe there's some people that just don't understand when we talk about Dharma and Nirvana, like what those terms mean.
Mm-hmm. Well, nirvana, people often, they hear that phrase and they think it means some kind of, 24/7 state of purple fireworks shooting out of the top of your head or something. And it's actually something much, much better than that. Literally, nirvana means blown out, blown away. So when our misconceptions, when our suffering, when our needless internal grinding of our own gears just gets blown out and we're left with this delicious spaciousness inside, that's nirvana. And dharma is a very big word, but very roughly speaking, dharma is the path of awakening to nirvana. Now, the first couple of words of my title I borrowed from a novel by Jack Kerouac, The Dharma Bums, and he actually borrowed the phrase from the poet Gary Snyder. And the idea of Dharma Bums to me is like, ski bums follow the snow, surf bums go wherever the surf is good. Dharma Bums are people like me who, they may have jobs, they may have families, but they're really following the Dharma. They're just following the path of awakening wherever it's juiciest.
Well, it's exciting to see how this comes into literature. And so when we look at, just how you found this inspiration to bring these classics together with Dharma, what was the catalyst for that?
Well, I've always loved literature. I talk about this in the introduction to the book. I had a wonderful, wonderful English teacher in the 10th grade, John Fresius at Van Nuys High School, who was just a wild man and just passionate about Shakespeare and Keats and John Donne. So that was the one thing, and that really set me on the path to become an English teacher when it became time for me to have a grown-up job. And I did wind up teaching for 33 years at the Pingree School, a very kind of top-drawer prep school in New Jersey. And the other thing was that in my childhood, I started having some kind of spontaneous Nirvana-ish experiences. And so soon I was finding gurus and roshis and lamas and going off and going on sometimes long meditation retreats with them. And I started putting the two things together. I'd come back for 30 plus years. Every fall you're teaching Huckleberry Finn, you're teaching The Great Gatsby. And meanwhile, you're doing all this meditation and hanging out with all these sages. You start connecting the dots. So, for example, there's a wonderful moment in Adventures of Huckleberry Finn early in the book where Huck has finally managed to run away from his horrible, brutal, alcoholic father. It's late at night and Huck runs to the river, the Mississippi River. He grabs a canoe that he's salvaged, jumps in and rows madly to the middle of the river. And finally, he's safe. He's free. And he puts the oars down. He stops steering. He stops rowing. He lies down on his back in the bottom of the canoe and looks up into the moonlight. And he says, I had a good rest and a good smoke on my pipe and just looked into the moonlight, not a cloud in it. The sky looks ever so deep when you lay on your back in the moonlight. I never knowed it before. I went, wow, there it is. There's the initiation. There's the baptism into transcendence, into nirvana, the vastness of the sky there subbing for Nirvana, the internal vastness of Nirvana. And as it happens, some of the lamas that I'd studied with in the Tibetan tradition, one of their favorite meditation techniques is something called Namkai Naljor, which means sky-gazing meditation, where literally you gaze, you keep your eyes wide open and just gaze into the sky and just let yourself kind of melt into the sky. And then I soon started finding moments like that in all these other books, The Great Gatsby, the poetry of Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman. I taught Macbeth for over 30 years, and all of Shakespeare's plays are just full of these wonderful Enlightenment goodies. So I just essentially wound up writing about all the books that I couldn't wait to write about. And I knew for over 40 years that I needed to write this book, and it was just finally getting to the right moment where I felt ready to do this thing.
Well, we're so glad that you did. And this is probably the only time people will hear this when we talk about writings like Dr. Seuss and William Shakespeare.
Yes, in the same breath.
In the same sentence. I mean, so you mentioned a little bit about William Shakespeare, and why don't you share a little bit about that and Dr. Seuss? Because I think a lot of times when people look at any type of path to enlightenment, this, maybe Shakespeare a little bit, because when you start getting into the verses, it's like, okay, you really kind of are getting a deeper meaning. But Dr. Seuss, you got to help me with that one.
Okay. So Shakespeare, I chose to write about Macbeth. Macbeth opens with the three witches chanting, "Fair is foul and foul is fair." What? You're saying, like black is white and white is black is the equivalency of opposites. Down here on the earth plane, down here in the material world, that doesn't make sense. From the point of view, but what it points to is that there's a bigger point of view. There's a larger picture where opposites turn out to be equivalent, kind of two sides of the same coin. Macbeth, usually when you study Macbeth in high school, what you're taught is, well, Macbeth's fatal flaw is his ambition because he's so driven to be the king. But in reality, he's told at the beginning, thou shalt be king hereafter. In other words, it's in his destiny to be the king. His desire to be the king is not his problem. His problem is what he ignored was the last word in the sentence, hereafter. His flaw is impatience. When you're driving in heavy traffic and you're kind of, you're stuck in this block and you're running late to get somewhere, and that feeling of kind of straining forward in your seatbelt, kind of trying to be in the next block, but you keep being in this block, you know what I'm talking about?
I sure do.
Yeah. So that's it right there. It's that simple. And if you just think about, all the ways that we do that in our life, we're trying to be in the next thing. We're trying in the next moment when it's always this moment. We're like the donkey, trying to catch up to that carrot that they dangle in front of it, and we never catch the carrot. So this is, what happens to people. They're so caught up in the future moment, which is always just imagination, because it's always, in case you haven't noticed, it's always right now. And it's in Macbeth's impatience that he winds up, killing everyone and just making chaos of his own life and of the whole kingdom. Now, The Cat in the Hat is especially dear to my heart because that's one of the first books that made me fall in love with writing. I was actually I think 7 years old when it was published in 1957. And, so my first year of school, we had the Dick and Jane readers, Fun with Dick and Jane, which were just deadly. They were just, if you wanted to design a book to make kids hate reading and be completely bored, it would be the Fun with Dick and Jane series. So along comes Dr. Seuss with The Cat in the Hat, and the cat is a troublemaker. The cat, he's a Zen prankster. At the beginning of the book, the boy and the girl are sitting bored, looking out the window. They're grumbling because it's a rainy day and they can't go out and play. And the cat comes striding through, and the picture, which takes up 2 pages, the two kids are way over on the left, and the cat is way over on the right, just uninvited, barging through the door. And it's for all the world like Kramer in Seinfeld, The way he was always barging through the door and he was always bringing trouble and hilarity. So that's what the cat is doing. The cat's like a Zen trickster saying, "Okay, let's shake things up. We're going to turn things upside down." And he creates chaos, but unlike the chaos that Macbeth creates, the cat turns out to know what he's doing. After he completely, wrecks the house, he comes up at the end with this fabulous kind of picker-upper mobile and puts everything back together again. And he says, "It is fun to have fun, but you have to know how," right? It is fun to have fun, but you have to know how. Where I live here in Santa Monica, we're a few blocks from Main Street, and certain Saturday nights we can walk. My wife and I will go for a walk and go past on a summer evening like this, where the bars have their doors open. You see a lot of people working really hard to have fun, and one of the bars actually has a sign in front that says, "Come on in and meet your future ex-wife."
Oh, wow.
Right. I saw that and I go, okay, that's people, they're having fun now, but they don't really know how. They're not going to wind up picking up the pieces in a way that's, their fun is going to come crashing to an end.
Well, and especially when they're looking outside themselves for that fun, instead of really kind of diving into their own
Right.
spirituality or their own spiritual practice.
Right, right. Well. There you go. And that brings us to The Great Gatsby, which that's a chapter I really enjoyed writing. Gatsby, what makes him great is his yearning. He is a great yearner. The very first time we see Gatsby, it's late at night. He's standing on his lawn next to his fabulous mansion on the north shore of Long Island, and he's gazing out across the water at a distant green light, which later on we find out that that's the light at the end of the dock owned by Daisy, this woman that he is madly in love with, who's married to someone else. And when we first see him, he's got his arms outstretched toward the green light. What a just perfect icon of the yearning that we all do. Now, the problem is that exactly as you say, when we identify the object of our yearning with some object, with something external to us, whether it's a person, a job, a situation, what an achievement, another trophy to put on our shelf. Ultimately, it doesn't work out. It's not a long-term solution for human yearning, because really what we yearn for, our yearning is infinite. One French philosopher wrote, "Man is born with a God-shaped hole in him and spends his life trying to fill it with other things."
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, yeah. So we have this yearning for the infinite because we are the infinite. This is the ultimate non-dual teaching that all the sages sooner or later wind up telling us, that we think we're a little wave, but we are the ocean. A wave doesn't have any existence separate from the ocean, but we've gotten as if cut off from our awareness that we're the ocean. And we spend our life looking for what is the big thing that will fulfill this emptiness that I feel. And we try to fill it up with, in Gatsby's case, there's two kind of tragic endings that can happen to great yearning. One is where you don't get the thing you're yearning for, and the other is when you do. In his case, he does. And actually, there's a wonderful moment the first time he's reunited with Daisy, and he's looking out across the water with her toward the green light. And it's foggy. It's been raining, so they can't see it. But he says, if it weren't for the rain, we could see that green light. And then suddenly, the book says, he became very quiet because he realized that the green light has lost its specialness now that he has Daisy. It says his count of enchanted objects had diminished by one.
I just love how you bring all that together. You can see where it's really connected, which is interesting because you also bring up this point, and I think the witches do at some point, where we're in this feeling of being disconnected. We're really looking to get that non-duality awareness going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the witches are interesting characters because they're always, not only do they say fair is foul and foul is fair, but the first time that Macbeth and his buddy Banquo meet them, one of them says, "You should be women, but your beards forbid me to interpret so." Now, these are women with beards, so they're gender fluid way before it was cool. So they just embody that, we're always looking for, okay, we want the fair and we want to find it somehow without the foul. And so we keep looking, we keep trying to chop up our experience into duality, and that keeps not working. Now, interestingly enough, the witches also have a good prediction for Banquo that he's not going to be the king, but his progeny, his descendants will be kings, and he's satisfied with it. Unlike Macbeth, he doesn't go on a ruthless campaign to make it happen faster. He's just in fact, he says to the witches something like, "Speak then to me who neither beg nor fear your favor." In other words, I'm kind of curious, but I'm not craving it. I don't need it I'm not needy the way my buddy here is. And what I got from this is, this whole business that we have of type A and type B personalities. Well, the man that discovered that was a cardiologist. I talk about this in the book. A cardiologist named Dr. Meyer Friedman. And the way he made this discovery was, after some years of running his office, where all these hypertension patients were coming in for treatment, the furniture in his waiting room started looking kind of shabby. So he brought in an upholsterer to look it over and give him an estimate to reupholster the stuff. And the upholsterer looked at it and he said, "This is really strange. In all my years in this business, I've never seen this." He said, "People's couches always wear out first at the back cushions. Yours have worn out first at the leading edge." And that's when Dr. Friedman realized, all these hypertensive types, they're all, even when they're sitting there, they don't sit back. They're leaning forward, like when the example before, when you're stuck in traffic, straining forward to be in the next block when you're always in this block. So Macbeth, we could say, is the type A approach to life, which winds up to be skillful. It's fun to have fun, but you've got to know how. He doesn't know how. Whereas Banquo is type B. He's you just be more laid back. Just, even when you're on an airplane, when they give you the safety talk and show you how to buckle a seatbelt in case you've forgotten. And then the last thing they always say is, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. Right? They know, they're wise enough to know to tell people, sit back, and be a Banquo type, not a Macbeth.
That is so fascinating, especially when you look at it through that lens. Now, for people who are not Buddhist, or maybe they're looking for a path of enlightenment,
mm-hmm.
Is this a book that would really kind of help them look at the world in a different way?
Oh, yeah. One of my teachers, actually, he was a Buddhist teacher, and I've had teachers from a number of traditions. I'm, as one friend of mine put it, I honor truth wherever I find it. I want all the truth I can get. So my book has a lot of teaching that uses, calls on Buddhist tradition and Buddhist vocabulary, but, I draw on the Gospels, I draw on psychology, I draw on it all. So yeah, I always try to, for all my years of teaching high school, I had a course called Literature of Enlightenment for juniors and seniors, and everyone, our lab work was lots of meditation. And I had to be very careful to not get in trouble with the parents, that, make it clear that I was not indoctrinating their kids, turning them into Buddhists or Hindus or something. And that was very helpful to me because it really made me keep on my toes in terms of presenting Enlightenment teachings in a way that's open to everyone of every religion or no religion. Because Enlightenment doesn't belong to the Buddhists. It doesn't belong to anyone. It's your own inner boundless oceanic nature. Now, it turns out that the Buddha came up with some really skillful language for describing that situation and how to open to it, but it doesn't involve any belief. There's one of the Buddha's most famous teachings. He came to this one town where a lot of teachers had come through, a lot of wandering sages had come through, and he gave his little Dharma talk. And one of the locals said, well, you're not the first holy man to wander through here. Who should we believe? Should we believe this one? Should we believe that one? Should we believe you? Should we wait for the next one? And the Buddha said, don't believe anyone. Don't take it on belief. Don't believe anything because a wise-looking person says it. Don't believe anything because it's in the books. Don't believe it just because it sounds logical to you or makes you feel good to think that. But test it out with your own experience. So really, he was teaching the scientific method. But, in the West, we've applied scientific method mostly to the outer world. He applied scientific method to our inner experience. And he ended with the words, probably my two favorite words from the Buddha, in his language, the Pali language. He said, "Ehi passiko." "Ehi passiko" means come and see, right? Not come and believe, not come and philosophize. Come and see, check it out.
Yeah, it's really having people discern for themselves what truth is for them,
Right.
and
Right.
as opposed to just following a guru. But okay, so we got to talk about this Mad Magazine thing. I mean, you've done retreats, meditation retreats with top gurus, and you name it. So,
Yep.
what happened with Mad Magazine with you?
Right. So what happened, and this is right at the very beginning of the book in the introduction. In fact, I reproduced the cover of the Mad Magazine. I was 11 or 12 years old. My family was going to go to a drive-in movie that night, which, we had such a thing in those days. And my mom sent me out to the garage to clear away all the comic books and toys that my brothers and I had left in the back seat. So I go out there and my mind was churning, which in those days, even at age, whatever I was, 12, my mind would churn a lot. Oh, what about this? What about that? There's just this kind of, free-floating anxiety. And I was kind of so used to doing that I didn't realize I was doing it. It was just, when the noise is constant, you just kind of think, well, that's what living is like. So I'm picking up these comic books. Next thing that happens, I pick up the Mad Magazine. And there on the cover, as usual, is the picture of Mad's idiot mascot, Alfred E. Newman, with his gap teeth and his cock eyes and his big, wide, completely beautiful, idiotic smile. And there is his slogan, "What? Me worry?" And all of a sudden, my mind stopped. Time stopped. Everything stopped. And what I suddenly saw so clearly, and this is really a matter of ehi passiko, you have to see it for yourself. And what I saw so clearly was that all this blah, blah, blah that my mind had been doing, it was called worry, and that I was doing it. It wasn't being done to me. That engine was constantly racing because my foot had been on the accelerator. And now, having seen that, I could take my foot off the accelerator and everything went silent. And that was my first really clear, nirvana-ish experience. And it just remained in this bliss. It was really like the top of my head came off and my brain kind of merged with the sky. It was like Huck Finn in the bottom of the canoe, or like Emily Dickinson, whom I quote later on, where Emily Dickinson, bringing enlightenment together with literature, said, "When I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry." So in this case, the poetry for me was "What Me Worry," and I went into this really just cut it with a knife, nirvana-ish experience that went on for the whole rest of that day and the rest of that night. So that got my attention. and within a few years, by the time I was 17 or so, I was reading the holy texts of the East and starting to look for gurus.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I just thought it was pretty interesting when we have these nirvana moments. And I think sometimes people may have them, but not really know what they're having, or maybe
Yes.
try to diminish it, going, well, I was just looking at, the birds flying. I don't understand what just happened.
Right. And often when we don't have names for things, we dismiss it and we forget it. There was a bit of research done once showing that, and like people who have trouble sorting through their sock drawers, getting two dark socks to match, will identify with this, that if you give people the task of sorting, color chips with a lot of similar colors, but you give them names for all the subtle variations, they can sort them better. So having names for, oh yeah, this is some Satori, this is Grace. It doesn't matter what the name is, as long as you got some name and know, oh, this is something worth paying attention to. And then it turns out, oh, it not only comes sometimes at random, arbitrarily, unbidden, as it did to me that day in the garage, but through meditation practice, which, by the way, I'll just say quickly, the key to meditation practice turns out to be to not work at it. And I make that point. This is the whole point of my teaching career, is meditation is the opposite of what people think. It's non-working. It's really letting go and letting be. And that's what I teach people how to do. And so by doing that, you can more and more cultivate that nirvana experience into your life and integrate it, so that ultimately it's not just when you're sitting with your eyes closed, you're walking around that way all the time, functioning from there, which turns out to be, that's when you function really at your best. When you always play your best game when you're in the zone, and that is the zone.
Well, it's interesting too that meditation has really become such a topic on the forefront here in the US. I mean, it's something that's been done all over the world for millennia,
Right.
and we're just kind of getting into it and seeing the great benefits of it. A lot of times people think, well, I've got to, I'm going to get into meditation, and they really feel like it's going to be a very difficult or time consuming, or maybe it's something that they just can't really involve in. What is it like, really?
Yeah, the thing is, it's often taught that way. It's often taught, oh, you have to concentrate, you have to work hard at it, and you have to sit for at least an hour a day to get any benefits. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to say this slowly because it took me years to get this sentence right. Any effort to create a non-agitated state of mind is itself a form of agitation. Right? I'll say that again. Any effort to create a non-agitated state of mind is itself a form of agitation. Right? There's the problem. That's the catch-22. You're trying to relax. It's like, okay, I want to flatten out all these waves on the surface of the ocean so I can have a nice calm ocean. So wham, 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 wham. I take a big paddle trying to flatten out all the waves, and I just make the water more turbulent. And that's the approach that most people take to meditation. And that's why they think you have to do it for an hour, because it's when, after an hour of trying to forcibly still the mind, you finally get exhausted and stop forcing, and then finally you just fall into effortlessness, and then it's lovely. So what I was fortunate enough to learn from my own teachers, and what I teach, is, well, let's skip the first 50 minutes, we skip the effort part and go straight to effortlessness. Because it turns out that if you just let gravity pull you down a couple of feet, just a few feet below the surface of the ocean, the water is always already silent. It doesn't matter what's going on at the surface of the waves. Up there, yeah, there's some sounds there, traffic coming from the street, there's some thoughts drifting in and out of my mind, but I'm not engaged with that. I've settled down into this place of inner silence, inner vastness, which has always been here, just a couple of inches below the surface.
I really like how you put that, because it does make it obtainable. I think a lot
Yes.
of times people think it's like something they'll never be able to do. And I like the ocean analogy because, gosh, isn't that the truth? I mean, we can't beat the ocean to be quiet, you know?
Right. Yeah, and look, I taught meditation to 15-year-olds for 33 years. Actually, 15-year-olds usually they get it right away because they're not as used to overthinking things and overworking at things. And the ones who got it, everyone gets it. The valedictorians took a little while longer. You know who got it right away? The jocks. Because they were
I'm
used to
afraid to
just
ask why.
yeah no because they were used to just connecting with things in a direct visceral way, not trying to overanalyze things. But by the way, I these days I lead meditation online via Zoom 3 times a week. On most weeks, it's free. It's open to everyone.
Well, I'm delighted we get to talk about your other book, Cinema Nirvana, Enlightenment Lessons from the Movies. And I've got to tell you, it is quite an interesting book. I'd like to know how you got even the idea of writing this book. I think it's the only book I've ever picked up that has both Buddha and Britney Spears quoted on the same page.
Right. And on the cover, a golden Buddha clutching a box of popcorn. I actually checked that cover design was my idea, and I checked it with, I have teachers in various spiritual and meditative traditions, and I checked with my Buddhist teachers. I said, "Is this okay to have the Buddha eating popcorn? That's not too irreverent?" And they said, "No, it's great." So we went ahead. So it's Cinema Nirvana, Enlightenment Lessons from the Movies. And the way it came about is that, two of the great passions of my life are the Dharma, the Enlightenment path, and movies. As I say in the introduction, I tell the story of how I fell in love with movies as a kid in the mid-50s watching Forbidden Planet with, Robbie the Robot. And what happened was, at the time I wrote this book, I was married to my now late first wife, and just my particular kind of mentality or madness, whatever it is, I keep drawing connections between things where generally other people don't see connections. So my wife and I would come walking out of a movie, and I would say, "Gee, that part there when this happened, and when she said this and he did that, that's just like in the Dharma teachings when XYZ." And I would rattle on for a while, and then my wife would say, "Dean, why don't you go over there and write this stuff down? Give me some peace." So I started jotting this stuff down, and after a while, I realized it was a book.
Well, I'm so glad you did because there's some parallels I couldn't even, without reading your book, I would have not made, like Easy Rider. Okay, let's start there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's a good one.
Yeah, Easy Rider is this iconic film of the '60s. The whole turn on, tune in, drop out generation, which I was right smack in the middle of, and it's about the search for freedom. Now, that's the search for freedom in a very overt way, in a way that runs into, if you've seen the film. For people who've seen the film, they know that the characters in the film run into a lot of grief from the locals as they're riding their motorcycles through the South. And we're all looking for freedom. I mean, that's really the Enlightenment teaching there. We all have this sense, this intuitive sense that what we are deep down, if you want to say our spirit, our soul, our beingness, our presence, there's something about it that's essentially boundless. Yet it finds itself living within boundaries, the boundaries of, get up in the morning, brush your teeth, go to work, yada, yada, the whole 9 to 5. And there's something intolerable about those boundaries. It's like a jail cell that we keep butting our head up against. So we all look for freedom, for liberation in different ways. So in the 60s generation, the hippie generation, it was okay, forget about society, forget about the 9 to 5 of the workday, forget about conventional marriage, let's just throw it all away. Now, turns out that doing that on that, throwing all those things away on that outward level, runs into a lot of problems. Those conventions are there for a reason. It turns out that all the Enlightenment traditions have been telling us all along, you can live within the boundaries of society. You can get up and do the 9 to 5 every day, but find that boundless liberation internally. That's what I do every morning. The first thing I do when I get up and I meditate. Yeah, and really in all of these films, we find people looking for liberation in different ways. One of my favorite films, and one of my favorite chapters in the book is on The Graduate, which is sort of the definitive film about being an adolescent, about the Dustin Hoffman character fresh out of college, and his kind of iconic line to his father, "I'm worried about my future." And the father asks, "What about it?" He says, "I want it to be different." And he never says different from what, but it's clear, different from the kind of mindless, dumb, suburban existence of his parents. And that, in teenage years, in the adolescent years, we all kind of get a dose of that. There's something about that time when we're looking, we're looking at all possibilities. We haven't gotten frozen into, okay, this career path, this marriage, so forth. Teenagers are famous for being hostile toward people who are trying to tell them what to do. And again, it's that impulse. How do I find this freedom in a lasting way? How do I find a way to live this freedom without, in a way that's sustainable, that's not just creating chaos wherever I go? And again, the answer turns out to be you find it internally.
What a great lesson that is with both movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I was specifically struck by The Truman Show with Jim Carrey, because it does kind of dive into these patterns that we seem to develop in our lifetimes.
Right. Maybe one of my favorite lines from The Truman Show, which is a brilliant, brilliant film, is, so for people not familiar with the film, they really should see it. Jim Carrey plays Truman, this nice fella who gets up every morning, kisses his wife, goes to work, and does not know that he is actually the star of a 24/7 reality show, which is wildly popular all over the world, and that his wife, his best friend next door, they've all got secret cameras on them. And they're all basically actors playing the roles of his wife and all the buildings that he doesn't go into are actually facades. They're movie flats. And the continuity of the show depends on his not realizing this illusion that he's caught up in. And when he starts to realize it, he realizes he has to break some of his habitual patterns, walk into buildings that he normally doesn't walk into to find out that they're just flats. And his big line there is, "Somebody help me, I'm being spontaneous." So, and again, this is in the Enlightenment teachings, that what we think of our routine life as ultimate, as the ultimate reality, but there is a kind of illusion to it. It's kind of like a dream. I don't want to say it's all a dream, but there is something dream-like about it. And when we start to catch on to that, for most people, there's got to be some contradiction. Something goes not as planned. For Truman, he's walking along one day, everything is fine. And suddenly, right in front of him, boom, right at his feet, drops turns out it's a light. It's a light like the lights they use to light Hollywood sets. And it falls out of his sky and it lands at his feet, and he picks it up, and it's marked something like, Orion 3 or something, meaning that it's like the third star in the constellation Orion, that all the stars in his sky are lights. It's all a set. So, well, for most people, it might be something like, okay, I've got my whole life planned out. My career is going to go like this and like that. And my family life's going to go like this and like that. And then something goes wrong. Something goes not as planned. That's the light that falls out of the sky for you. Something doesn't work as you thought it was supposed to, doesn't add up. And then you start to look. That for most people, it takes something like that to initiate the search. And what I find is that for most people, not everyone, but for most people, to get really serious about the enlightenment path, the path of awakening, usually something has to go wrong in their life. Often it'll be there's a relationship breakup or a career crisis or an illness or a loved one who gets very sick or who dies. And that's the light falling from out of your sky that makes you scratch your head and go, maybe there's something more here.
Yeah, it's very interesting what brings us to the path of following our own personal enlightenment, our own personal spiritual journey.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it could be as simple as a light falling from the sky, or it's the market crashing or
The market,
other things.
yes. I remember after 9/11, for people who are old enough to remember this, right after 9/11, there were lines around the block of people waiting to go into churches. It's like all of a sudden people were looking for some kind of spiritual answers. Now that went away after a few weeks. Also, very interestingly, after 9/11, drivers on the road became very, very thoughtful. I was living in New Jersey at the time, and New Jersey drivers are kind of notoriously rude and oblivious, but everyone, all the traffic, oh, no, after you. Yep, you want to cut into my lane? Please go ahead. And that went away after a little while. So, something needs to get our attention. Now, I was lucky in that I just had some spontaneous kind of opening experiences in childhood and was just very curious about the big what's what with a capital W early on, and started looking into these things before I was out of high school. And in those days, there was much more, it was much harder to find books like the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, which I was reading then. But I was lucky. I didn't have to have, bad things happen in my life to get serious about the path. So that doesn't have to be the case for everyone.
Just that inquisitive mind can drive people to look for other answers. And you're right. I mean, you look back 20, 30 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of information out there to help anyone who wanted to go on any path of enlightenment. They probably thought that you needed a padded room if you start asking about that,
Sure. Yeah. But we're all looking for it. I live in Santa Monica now, and occasionally my wife and I, when, we walk a lot, and sometimes we'll walk down Main Street on a Friday night or Saturday night where there's a bit of a bar scene. There was more of a bar scene before COVID. And you'd see, all these young people, the loud, head thumping music blasting away and, drinking away. And you can see they're looking for nirvana. They're looking to drown out their thoughts, drown out the thoughts of their busy minds with all that music and all that drink and all that hooking up. And not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just that as a path of nirvana, it's kind of a blunt instrument, and the hangover can be pretty wicked. So this is just meditation is a more efficient tool to accomplish what everyone's trying to accomplish anyway. So this is why in the book I really emphasized films that you would never think of as having anything to do with enlightenment or spirituality. When I was working on it, people would say, "Oh, you're writing a book about movies and enlightenment? You need to write about The Matrix. You need to write about," and they would name all these really obvious things where the spiritual content was, right on the surface. So I sort of made a list of all the films people told me to write about, and then I made a point not to write about any of those, because that's low-hanging fruit. That doesn't make the point. So instead, I wrote about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, The Godfather, Casablanca, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, films that you would never think there's any kind of an Enlightenment connection, because then there's a game involved. Then it's fun, and more than that, that it makes the point that liberation, that happiness, that boundlessness we're all looking for, it's everywhere if we can just open our eyes a little wider to it. There's a story in the Zen tradition about a monk a Zen monk who asks the Zen master, "What is the Buddha?" And in the Zen tradition, that question, "What is the Buddha?" he's not asking about the person, the Buddha. He's asking about Buddha mind. What he's asking is, where is enlightenment? Where's that boundlessness? Where's that enlightenment we're looking for? What is the Buddha? Now, the Zen master could have replied, "Oh, it's the Buddha is the beautiful sunset. The Buddha is the happiness you feel when you hear the laughter of your children," all of which would be true, right? But what the Buddha says what the Zen master says in this story is, the Buddha is a pile of cow poo in the middle of the road, right? Now,
okay.
you see, that's also true, because Buddha is there. We can, in Western terms, we would say God. Where is God not? Right? God has to be everywhere. Where is the infinite not? If I say, "Oh, the infinite is everywhere except on this one tiny little point at the point of the nail of my pinky finger," then that can't be true. Then it's not infinite, right? So the infinite, which is what we're all looking for, must be everywhere. So it must be in the cow poo as well. So that's a more significant, a more useful answer, because if you can see it there, you can see it everywhere. So that's why I made a point. No, I don't want to write about enlightenment in The Matrix. That's too easy. I'll write about enlightenment in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or in the Godfather. And then, then it's fun. Then I start looking, okay, the Godfather, God the Father. Just switch it around a little bit. The moment I realized, oh, God the Father, the whole film came into Dharma focus for me.
It's a very stunning analogy how you brought that together. And, the one I would really love to touch on is Jaws. So you look at that. I mean, it's a cult classic at this point. It wasn't a classic when I was growing up. Anyway, it's a cult classic now. So how does that relate to what we're talking about?
Right. Yeah. I had so much fun writing my Jaws chapter. See, because most people think of Jaws as a film about terror. And that makes sense if you're looking at it from the human's point of view. But I said, okay, let me flip this around and look at the film from the shark's point of view. And in fact, the very, very opening of the film is the very opening shot under the opening credits. It's a point of view shot as the camera is going through the water, going through seaweed. And we realize in retrospect, oh, that's the shark's point of view. As the shark, and what's the shark doing as he goes this way and that way through the seaweed? He's looking for food. He's foraging. So in that subtle, almost subliminal way, from the very first moment of the film, Spielberg is putting us in the shark's shoes, so to speak, if sharks wore shoes. And then from that point of view, it's no longer a film about terror. It's a film about hunger, right? The shark has to keep eating. He has to keep filling himself up. He's this just incredible nonstop eating machine. That's us. That's us. We're hungry. And it's always, oh, the next is going to be the one that's going to make us so happy our head will explode and we'll never want another thing. So that's that hunger that drives the shark. The shark is us. The shark is us.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating how you weave all that together, and it makes perfect sense from an enlightenment perspective. Where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about how to meditate? I know you mentioned a little bit earlier I'm
Yeah.
sure there are a lot of people out there going, well, wait a minute. I thought I had to have everything perfectly quiet and control all my surroundings. And
Yeah.
I want to learn this other way.
Yeah, whenever I'm going to be in New York soon, and one of my favorite things is meditating in the New York City subway system because it's nice and noisy. Yeah, so what they can do is come to my website, deansluyter.com. It's tricky to spell. It's Dean, Dean, Sluyter, Sluyter. SLUYTER.com. And there they can find information on my books, on my free Zoom sessions. They can also go to my YouTube channel, Dean Sluyter channel on YouTube, where I've got a lot of discussions from the Zoom sessions and a lot of guided meditations available there. Yeah. So yeah, come all, the more the merrier.
Well, Dean, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
You bet. It's really a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Dean. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your 2 new books, The Dharma Bum's Guide to Western Literature, Finding Nirvana in the Classics, and Cinema Nirvana, Enlightenment Lessons from the Movies. Both books are available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. We're going to pause here for a quick moment, and we'll be right back after these messages. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.